This episode of the Better Every Shift podcast is sponsored by MagnaGrip. Eliminate diesel exhaust fumes from inside the fire station with a MagnaGrip exhaust removal system. Learn more at magnagrip.com.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Every Shift podcast. My name is Aaron Zamzo, and even after 100 plus shows, I still get to host this thing, and I'm happy to be here. I'm a fire officer in Wisconsin. I'm also a writer, contributor to Fire Rescue One, and I get to write for one of the best editors in the business. I call her the Commander, Janelle Fosquet, who is also with us. Hi, Janelle. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm great. Today I always get excited, but our guest today is someone near and dear to my heart because he actually is responsible for me getting promoted in a way because I had to watch his videos. And so when our listeners, if you're listening to this guy, you got to please go to our YouTube channel and watch because, Chief Derek Alkonis is our guest today. And a lot of us know you, Chief, from UL and NIST and a lot of the, great videos that you produced in the 2012 to 15, 16, 17 era there that a lot of us were kind of now in the fire service were trained on. And before we dig into that, let me introduce you formally because you have a litany of things that you've been involved with and again are very instrumental in a lot of our education here in the fire service. So to our listeners, Chief Derek Alkonis is our guest today. He's the research program manager for FSRI, which is the Fire Safety Research Institute, part of UL Research. He also does a lot with firefighter health and safety and leads efforts on the wildland urban interface, which we'll talk about. Prior to that, Chief was 31 years on the Los Angeles County Fire Department. Most recently, you were assistant fire chief in charge of air and wildland. I remember talking about the different pieces of machinery that you had to like try to get yourself used to and up to date with. So that was another fun conversation you and I have had. And, and I like to say, like, you were the original, all these fire shows, like you were kind of the guy who kind of brought that forth, like the real grit of it, because when you started getting involved with UL and FSRI and a lot of the research, you Hollywoodized a lot of those videos because you knew that was a way to connect with us. And we'll get into that as well. There's so many other things that you've been involved with. But Chief, first and foremost, thanks for being here. And how are you doing?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. All is well. Busy as ever. And, Underwriters Laboratory Fire Safety Research Institute keeps me hopping into retirement, which has been great. I love working with these guys, Steve Kerber, Dan Majikowski, Gavin Horn, and Craig and Keith and all those guys, just wonderful to work with. And so I feel very fortunate.
Well, you fit right in with them because you were with LA County Fire when a lot of this research was coming off, and you were kind of the guy. And we'll start here. Like I met you back in 2016, 2015. I was a fly in the wall in some of these board meetings for some of the popular conferences, and you were starting to introduce how fire was burning differently and what the research and data was showing you. And I was super, like I said, I don't know what I think. I think you guys thought I was the tech guy because I was in a sweatshirt and sweats, but fast forwarding now 10 years later, how instrumental that was for me personally to understand and learn from you. Review that with me a little bit. Like we were talking off screen. I mean, you were in these rooms trying to explain to some of the big minds of the fire service about, hey, let's look at this data. Do you remember kind of what were your feelings and what were you thinking when you started to kind of take this endeavor on?
Yeah. So, I mean, it really started when I became a captain in 97 or so. And that the weight of that responsibility of knowing that I was going to be calling shots for the public's life as well as for my own firefighters, it was just like a heavy burden. I mean, I felt it. And one of the things that I've done throughout my life is that if I don't understand something, I dive into it, much like many of us do, right? You do the research, you find out what you don't know. We're like, oh, shit, man, I really need to know more. And I remember going to some of these fire conferences, like FDIC Firehouse, and I was there as a presenting, usually on something health and fitness wise, because I was primarily into that in the 90s into the early 2000s. And I would stand in line for a disc that Dan Majikowski was handing out at the NIST booth. I don't know if you guys remember that, but he had like a little booth, and he was handing these things out. And so you get these discs, and you go back and you put them in your player, and you're like, oh wow, look at this. And
for those that are, it's a DVD, like it wasn't downloadable. It was like it was actually a physical thing. You put it in.
It's a physical thing, right? Yeah, you had to slide in your computer, and
sometimes you had to clean it because it didn't work so well. I mean,
that's right. Yeah. And so I started watching this stuff, and I'm like, oh man, and there's a lot of stuff that I really don't know. And here I'm responsible for these people. I had a few close calls, one in particular, I think that was in 2005, and where a firefighter got burned, and then I was even more engaged, more learning. And so fast forward several years, now I'm in charge of training. And by this time I was involved with UL. Steve Kerber had left NIST and started up FSRI. I was on the advisory board, and the amount of learning that went on during that time frame was like overwhelming, and all the stuff I didn't know. And so when I got into training, my feeling was, oh no. So I know this stuff, but the firefighters don't know it completely. I've got to come up with a way of sharing the information so it's actionable. That was my focus. And I used to tell my wife, I'm like, I can't come home tonight until I totally digest this and understand it and figure out how we can get it out to the field like yesterday. Because I felt this burden of responsibility.
Yeah.
Knowing something that could make a difference.
The biggest thing, like, what's the biggest thing that was standing out, right? Fires are burning faster and hotter. Combustibles are much more deadly, right? Like, what I missed there? Is that about right? Like,
that was it. And then they respond to air. That was the biggest thing, right?
Right.
So now making sure that you're managing the air to the fire, which made so much sense.
But at the time, we were, and this is why, sorry to cut you off, but this is why this is such, this is why you were such a pivotal player in this, because at the time, everybody's talking about ventilation.
Yeah, right.
Get rid of the smoke.
Yes.
And now you're seeing something that says, wait a tick, we're not getting rid of the smoke. We're ingesting oxygen into this. And this thing is different, right? Okay. Yep. So just so people know, this is before what, right now people are hopefully are saying, well, yeah, duh. Everybody knew that. Yeah. Nobody knew that 10 years ago. And you were the first guy to kind of bring that to light. And that's why I really want people to understand how important you are to the fire service here. So sorry to interrupt, but I get excited about it. So.
Yeah. So then we had, we have 170 stations. They're spread out over 4,000 square miles. You've got 3,000 firefighters, and you've got about 3 to 5 recruit classes cycling through every year. So you got these new firefighters that need to be trained in this new stuff. And then you have all these incumbent firefighters that need to be trained as well. So it's like, it has to happen yesterday. We're late. So that's where the whole video thing came up. And that's what that story I've kind of told. Janelle was in the class a couple of weeks ago, and like brainstorming, like, how do we do this in a effective way where people feel like, oh, I can watch this and I can actually understand it. And then even more importantly, I can do it. Like I need to be able to do something different. So that's where I sat in training at the time. And there's a whole story that goes on.
I think it's great. So what you turned to Hollywood in a way, correct?
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, and fortunately, we live in Los Angeles. So, you turn around and you have somebody that went to art school. You turn around and somebody was an actor. You turn around and somebody was a screenwriter. Literally, that's how it is. And sure enough, there was people in the fire department that had been to screenwriting school, went to UCLA for that. Another guy went to LA Film School, and you've got actors all over the place, right? And so I got these folks to say, "Hey, we want in. Let's do it." And we made a team, and we started cutting videos. And the first one we went to was like, okay, should it be a hard from the yard, or should it be door control? And so we decided on door control because of we felt like managing the oxygen to the fire is really important, and we still want people to go in, and they would be buying off on that more than just hitting it hard from the outside first. So that's the thing that we launched with, and we kind of poked. We said, hey, there's other fire departments doing it, so why aren't we doing it? And we're bold too. I think we were bold. We're a little provocative. We poked on the videos and made people like stand up and get angry at times and call me out on things like, who gives you authority to say this? And I'm like, I'm the training chief. I don't.
Yeah.
I have to make decisions, man. I don't have time to be asking people. I don't.
Yeah.
Not when it happened. It needed to be done yesterday. I mean, if you're waiting for the bureaucracy to catch up on some of these things, you're never going to implement.
Yeah.
You won't do it. There's too much bureaucracy, sometimes even politics, and sometimes emotion that gets wrapped up. And so, is the person in charge, the chief said, hey, you're the training chief, and you go do your thing. Yeah. So that's what we did.
And, and going back to some of those conversations you had, there were some people in the room that you were presenting data, and some leaders within the fire service just said, okay, I don't believe that necessarily, or I don't see that. And I think as time went on, some of the research showed it. But I thought there was some other great conversations about, transitional attack you kind of mentioned a little bit, and door control. And, one of the big things I remember was, okay, so this research is telling us this. It's up to the departments to validate it and apply it to their own policy and procedures. And I thought, that conversation was really positive, and I think brought kind of everybody together. Do you remember which one I'm really talking about here? Is if you got a lot of people and you can do that, great. But if you don't, then, utilize the research that way, right? Like, did you ever feel like you're all alone, or did you kind of feel like after people started to understand, hey, okay, he's got data, let me dig in more? I mean, kind of take me through like that part of it. Cause I think for a little bit you were out, you were the only one out on an island.
Yeah. And I think some of our folks thought that way too. It's like, why are we doing this? And, he says on the video that New York City's doing it, but we don't know anybody in New York City. We don't have any, that there's not a New York City chief next to him talking about it. So how do we know if he's telling the truth? I'm sure there was a lot of that stuff going on, and LA City's not doing it. Why aren't they doing it? They're next door to us. And how about the other 29 fire departments in LA County? What are they doing? Why are we the only one doing it? So a lot of those questions came up. But over time, we did engage with all of those fire departments, and they all came on board as well. It took time. And although I don't completely understand that, because the data was yelling at us, literally. And when you look at the number of close calls, near misses, firefighter fatalities that occurred due to rapid fire growth, it was indicating that there's a lot of truth to what we were finding in the laboratories. So that to me, there was no debate. It was like, no, this is factual stuff. We got to move. Mm-hmm. Understanding all of that, the fire service is steeped in tradition, which we all know, which it's tough. And then we have these phrases, get on the inside, go through the front door, and, all of those type of things, right? You like get it. But so breaking through some of those barriers, like now it's saying, well, understand what the fire is doing, understand where it's receiving its air. You might be able to shut a door, shut a window, you may be able to hit it out from the outside, get inside and finish it off. Oh, that's a lot different than what we were telling before, than just bow your neck and get in there and get hungry.
Or get burned.
Or get burned.
And then wonder why.
Yeah.
Right? Like, yeah.
Exactly. So those are the things that we were kind of fighting through. And I mean, that's why it was John Salk and I, at Firehouse, Tim Senelbach put us in front of, like, hey, I want you guys to do this. And we'd battle out these type of things. Right?
Yeah.
We'd have these debates. And in some cases, there was a lot of folks on the other side that would say, just get in there and get it done as fast as you can. And that way you've controlled the environment. And you don't necessarily need to play with it as much. And we're not saying that. I mean, it's using the tools that you have. And in some case, it means shutting a door could be an adequate tool. I mean, we know that with food on the stove. You put a grease fire out by just putting the cover on it, the lid on it. So
yeah.
That's same type of stuff going on there.
You and Chief were really, I remember those conversations, because it wasn't like he was just questioning some tactics and everybody taking the one tactic for heart. Right. And I think he said too, like, for a while he was getting people going, like, the data's telling you one thing, the data's telling you that. And I remember having conversations with him. He's saying, I understand that, but that doesn't mean that you should, like you said, the best tactic might be you have two people, close the door, then pull your line, right? Like, instead of just going to grab the line into a house that's got now an extra minute and a half of air and training into it, like, close that door. And what he was saying is just understand your resources and what tactics you can take for those resources you have. And, and I think obviously we had to do this East Coast, West Coast thing, but it was really, I think that helped get to where we are, and I think your patience and your demeanor helped with that too. And so, I can't give you I'm giving you as many compliments as I can, but like I said, I want people to really understand you kind of stuck your neck out, and change can happen in the fire service, by the way, folks. Right? Like, it's not easy. And
well, really, and really it comes down to, I mean, we're saving lives and property and protecting the environment, those three things, right? It always comes back to the incident priorities. So how effectively can you address the incident priorities? That's paramount every single time. And so the science would indicate how best to do it, because fire is physics and it will abide by the laws of physics every single time. So then it means the human mind has to figure out where it's at physically, and then provide some sort of intervention. And the interventions are the issue, like when you do the intervention. But we have to process what's in front of us. Like, look at the fire. Where is it receiving its air? Where do we anticipate it being? What is burning inside? Where are the potential people? Where can that fire progress to? All of those things are part of your size up, of course. But those need to be processed instead of just breaking open the front door or putting people on the roof and cutting a hole in the roof because you had 35 people show up at the fire. Mm-hmm. And you need people in different groups and divisions. It's not that way. It's the fire is going to tell you what it needs to be extinguished.
So, Chief, I'm curious, the data screaming at you, you're collaborating with nearby departments. How methodical was the process in LA County of getting buy-in? Was it like, all right, we're going to hit them from this angle and then this angle and then this angle? Or was it just, hitting them with one round of training? What did you do with the folks that were not on board?
Yeah. Okay. Well, the first thing I did when I got into training is we went through and prioritized topics that we felt we needed to train on. And so we had this spreadsheet that went through, and it had all these topics from SCBA skills to, interior firefighting, wildland stuff, hazmat, everything was earthquake response, everything was on there. And then it was all tied to policies that we have that you can train to based on the policies and the training instruction materials. And then we prioritize. We said, okay, is it a 1, 2, or 3? And then we put them in like where it needed to be for the time of year. So if you're training for brush season, and we look at when our brush calls started, then you put that 2 or 3 months before that, and then you start training for that event. We know that, and we did the same thing. So for all the different topics, like we even looked at structure fires when they were going to be, and they pretty much spread out over the whole 12 months, really didn't matter. But we're always looking at the response calls to find out when we should be training for something. And then once we did that, for the like the evidence-based stuff that was coming out from NIST and UL, we got a committee together, and we said, okay, you guys got to study this stuff, and everybody's got to really understand it, and then we're going to come together and we're going to make some decisions on how we're going to present this material. And so we did that, and then before we rolled out the first video, we had stuff going on in recruit training. It was going on concurrently. So the new recruits were receiving the instruction. Now the incumbents are getting it. And the way we did the incumbents before we released the video is we had what we call battalion training officers. So there's 22 battalions in LA County Fire, and you have all of these battalions sending their battalion training officer rep for each shift. So there's 66 of them, and they get the instruction face to face from our training staff. And so we'd sit down in front of them, we'd give them some demos. We couldn't light any fires all the time, but we that would have been the best. And then we told them what was going to happen. We showed them the video. This is the hands-on. We want to go along with it, and then we went from there. Where we kind of screwed up is we should have spent more time with the chief officers. I mean, I think that was a critical error on our part. We should have spent more time educating them on the research, the implementation plan, and made them part of it. The other thing I think we did really well is we engaged with what I'll call the shot callers of the county. So these are like your more seasoned members of some of the stations, getting them involved with the process and getting them to understand, what we were doing. I mean, before we rolled out the door control and the exterior water attack, we did it ourselves. We lit fires, and our training staff went through numerous fires, like exercising door control and how to make it work. And we called upon some of those shot callers, more experienced kind of KG firefighters out there, outspoken folks that really had a following and had them help us. And that was, I think, really helped the plan too.
So Chief, all those lessons that you learned, through the last 10 years, now you're retired from LA County Fire. You're now working on a much larger scale with FSRI. What are you guys, what are you working on now? I mean, you do have the greatest gig. You get to set all these fires, but what are some of the really cool things you want to share with us today that you guys are developing and working on?
So me personally, I'm assigned to the Maui Wildfire investigation. And so I've been on that since late August. And we have a team of folks that I work with to complete a 3-phase investigation reports, independent reports. First one was we've published that, and that is the timeline report. The second one is the analysis of what happened, and the third one is the forward-looking, which is what we're working on right now. But in addition to that, we're heavily engaged in WUI research, and it's kind of a new field for us. At least for the last 3 years now, we've really leaned into that space. When you see so many communities being lost to conflagration, where fires started in the vegetation, moved into the built environment, and just destroyed hundreds to thousands of homes, we're not doing something right?
Yeah.
We know that we don't understand it all. So we're into that, understanding fires from going from structure to structure and understanding that better. And so we light a basically a house on fire, a room, and then we allow that to extend out to a target building. And so we're studying like how that impacts different types of siding materials, how it impacts different types of window configurations, and really understanding that. We've got research in embers, firebrands, and understanding how those embers transfer their heat to different types of materials, and how then that gets moving to a larger fire. We've got we also have research going on, of course, in the lithium-ion battery space. A lot of stuff going on there with Adam Bowery's group. We're burning vehicles. We've been burning them for the last 2 or 3 weeks in our Northbrook facility. And so that's been interesting to really understand how much energy comes off of these electric vehicles, and then also the products of combustion, and how those products of combustion are impacting the health of the firefighters and citizens, the owners, as they're burning. So understanding that more. The energy storage systems is another one. You have solar panels, and then you have batteries sitting on the outside of your garage or on the inside of your garage. What happens when those go off into thermal runaway, and what are the fire conditions that exist there, and what are the health impacts? Really understanding how to address those fire suppression wise. These are a lot of things that we don't know.
Yeah. Preliminarily, what can you relay to the listeners just about any one of those topics, that something you are like, hey, out of all this is one thing we're learning, make sure we do this. Like, you got any of those for me? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if I'm a firefighter, using the reach of your nozzle is like really important. I mean, I can't overemphasize that, because that falls in line with the health impacts to us. The closer you are to the products of combustion, especially if you don't have an SCBA on, the more likelihood you're going to take on some of that stuff, and you just don't want it. So using the reach of your host stream as much as possible, and eventually you're going to have to get in there and get in tight. But if you can use the reach to knock things down initially, that's important for sure in all cases. And then, in terms of like where we take the research and how we convert it into learning, I mean, we've got a whole team of instructional designers that are trained in that discipline, and we have videographers and screenwriters and all these folks that are focused on that aspect of taking our learnings from the research, packaging it up, and then getting it out to the fire service and the public, which is awesome. I mean, I think they're doing what we were doing in LA County at a much bigger scale, and with much more trained team members. So, I ask people all the time, and if you're not tapped into FSRI's information that we're putting out there on our Fire Service Academy, then you're missing out. I mean, you need to be tapped into that, and when new stuff comes out, you need to be on it. And because we're there to provide a higher level of efficiency and safety. Remember, I didn't say safety first, because I know that irritates people sometimes, right? But
yeah.
and I understand why, but really we want you to be more efficient, effective, and then safety is kind of a result of that. So, training you how to perform with the tools that you have, and understanding the fire behavior in whatever is burning, whether it be a wildland, a structure, batteries, or whatever. We're going to get that information to you. That's our goal.
Breathing in diesel exhaust fumes is like walking into a fire without a mask. Protect yourself with MagnaGrip, the easiest, most reliable exhaust removal system that features a true 100% seal to eliminate diesel exhaust fumes in a snap. Visit magnagrip.com to download MagnaGrip's free grant guide with expert tips to solidify a grant for essential safety equipment, such as MagnaGrip's exhaust removal systems. That's magnagrip.com to download the free guide.
And a lot of stuff, I've had conversations about, some people like the word aggressive, some people don't. When you hear aggressive, what do you think of, and what side of that are you on?
Okay. So I when I was leaving the fire service, I felt like it was an overused term. And I felt like it was a term to show that, or to explain my desire to get in there and do work. And I didn't feel like it was necessary. It's like, hey, I'm going to be appropriately aggressive where I need to be.
Mm-hmm.
At other times, I will be measured and calculated. And at other times, I'll be even surgeon-like. And I don't think surgeons are aggressive, right? At least I hope they aren't.
I hope my surgeon's not. That's all I know.
Yeah. I hope they think through the problem and look at it and understand the issue, what's being presented to them, and then they use the appropriate tools to fix the problem. Firefighters are much the same way. We don't have to be Neanderthal about it, right? Fire is physics. It's going to respond to the type of fuel and oxygen it has and the weather patterns and all that business. But we have to understand that better so we know how to use our tools effectively. Do we have to use them aggressively? I think when I think of aggressive, I think of a linebacker, and I think of Mike Singletary at times. Like, I mean, he was an aggressive player. He had to be very physical. Most linebackers are. Most football players are. But a quarterback isn't necessarily aggressive, right? And they're more thoughtful. And I think of all the things that you need to be processing on the fire ground. Once you've processed everything and really understand how you're going to use your tool effectively, then maybe that's the time to be aggressive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, calculated.
I really went all the way around on that.
Well, I think what you're saying is calculated, because Mike Singletary would tell you he used to see where the hole was going, or where the play was developing. Now he's calculating that based off of his research, based off of his knowledge and his instinct. And then he's going quickly to right. Then he's making his decision. Mm-hmm. There's also times where you would see him look, understand it's a pass, set back, and right now, just because he's not moving forward, is he still being aggressive? I think he's being calculated. I think educated, right? Like, aggressive to someone means, like you said, I'm just going in. I'm going to barrel down that door and I'm going to try to tackle the beast. Well, that's not aggressive. That's just dumb, knowing what the research, right? Like,
I agree.
Especially if, you don't have a hose line that's, proper for the job. Mm-hmm. And if you're not in the place where the fire actually is. So, I think it's a great conversation that people have. And you said something to me right away, going back to, when you started to come up and question things, if someone says aggressive and they mean one thing and you mean something different, we need to have more conversations about that. If you and I don't agree about a certain tactic or fire, strategy, we need to embrace those conversations, right? Mm-hmm. Like, even to this day, are you still having those where people maybe don't believe what the research is telling them?
Yes. And most of the time where I get a little agitated, I would say, is when you have vertical ventilation when it's unnecessary, and where that resource could have been used more effectively, perhaps to search and save lives. And I think that's critical, because it's life safety is the number one incident priority. Everything you do is focused on that incident priority. So that means that all of those different tasks that you assign out as an incident commander should be related to that. I'm creating better conditions to save more lives. And what I'm seeing, at least sometimes when I watch it on the news, sometimes when I read a near miss report or whatever, or I hear a story from a fellow firefighter, I'm like, man, they're still not getting it. Like they're sending
Yeah.
folks to the roof when it's unnecessary. Um, and it's being above the fire is the most dangerous place to be. We know that from firefighter fatality history, and so I think that's still a place where I feel like if we really understood fire and how it grows in enclosed spaces, and how if we limit the oxygen supply, and if we provide a cooling effect as we make entry, wall ceiling wall, we can have a significant impact on that fire, without putting people in a position to be above the fire and to ventilate.
You make conditions survivable as well.
Yeah,
Correct?
exactly.
Much more survivable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And so I don't think we've gotten that message across effectively for some reason. And maybe that's like a cultural thing too. Maybe because we have so many people on the fire ground, and we've trained so much on the use of these saws, and to be able to do vertical ventilation effectively, it has to be coordinated with the inside crew. So it has to be.
Yep.
Which means it has to be very well coordinated. And then you tell me how many fires that are actually well coordinated out there. I mean, there
tough.
is some, but oftentimes they're coming in different order. It's difficult to be totally coordinated when there's so many things going on. So it's difficult.
Yeah.
So, I think I feel like we need to readdress that. We need to poke everybody and say, hey, are we addressing that number one incident priority effectively? And even the second one, to control the fire, right? I mean, if you're adding air and the fire is only getting larger, then you're definitely not achieving one, you're not achieving two, and you're actually burning up more property. So you're not achieving three either.
Right. Well, and you're making it less survivable for somebody if they were in there.
Yeah. So one's out.
Right, yeah. So, but sometimes why we still do that just because, hey, that's the way we always did it. It's in our protocols. Right. And people need to have those conversations and question those sometimes.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, I think just like sociologically, when we go out there and train, and I was one of these guys too. You've spent all this time using the saw, learning how to cut a roof. And it takes a lot of skill to be able to do that. It takes strength, skill, and coordination and all that. Balance. It's not easy. You got all this weird equipment on you and you're cutting this hole. Very dangerous. So you train all that time for it, and then there's a big fire or just a small fire, and then you don't use it. You feel like, oh, come on, man.
Yeah.
I mean, I was ready to go. So to me, it does make sense because I was one of those guys too. Getting off the truck, let's go, let's get to the roof, throw the ladder. But now I look back on my time, I mean, those are back in the 90s, and I feel like, man, I would do it differently. I would want to get in the window and make a grab. I would prefer that we move that direction. And I get Sean Gray would be a big proponent of that as well, right? I mean, he's all about grabbing and
making the grab.
Yep. And hugging people.
Yeah. Well, it's another thing too. Like we talk about search, and I mean, I personally just was involved with a grab case, and that search is half the battle, and we don't talk enough about getting them out because my experience is that it's not a 180-pound sand-filled dummy. It is obviously a human life, but they're not helping at all, and they're slippery, and so I think that's right, another aspect of that too, that we kind of train, but we only train half. Right, we found them. All right, now let's drag them through that bad environment, out, down 3 steps, 7 steps, whatever it is, right? Like, and I think it goes back to your point too. If we're going up, we're doing all this ventilation stuff. Are we working on those other aspects of our game, in other words, and really asking questions too, like when can we use this? When is it effective? When is it not? And that's what I always love talking to you, because I could not agree with you on something, and you're like, okay, give me a question. Let's talk about that. And hopefully people listen to this, and if they're listening as a crew, which we hope they do,
Yeah.
open a discussion about this. Start a little training. Go on to the website. Like you said, you guys have so many great training opportunities there at FSRI. If they're not utilizing that, they need to, number one. And number two, and if they're not agreeing with it or seeing it, ask, have a conversation. I know you're very approachable at these conferences, but you got all these other things. They can reach out to me, and I'll try to put them in contact with someone too, to try to at least provide them with some insight on it. I mean, and I'll have a conversation with it. I'm not very smart though when it comes to it. I just relay what you guys all say. Right. So and it kind of brings up another thing too. Just we had mentioned wildland urban interface, as you guys on the West Coast call it WUI. Is that right?
Yeah.
WUI. And you're now in Maui. Are you seeing some things from Maui that you're like, man, when are we gonna get this point, or when are we going to start understanding this? Take me now into that study, because you've put in a lot of time, and I'm sure you're seeing some things you want to share.
Or when are we going to realize that WUI doesn't just affect the West?
Yeah, that's the other part. Correct. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and I think the IFF has stepped up big time on that front. I mean, they have the response to the interface training that's going out to fire departments around the country. I don't know how many they've offered, but they've done a really good job with taking the California operational curriculum and some others, and creating a multi-day program where firefighters in Indiana, in Ohio, and wherever, Tennessee, can receive this training, because these fires are occurring all over the place. So it doesn't see a certain region anymore.
The most deadly wildland fire ever is where? Do you know this?
Yes, Wisconsin, right?
Peshtigo, Wisconsin. Correct.
That's right.
Yep.
Over
So you'd think,
people.
yeah, and so you'd think, my experience with wildland fires stomping out with my foot, but that doesn't mean it cannot happen. Obviously, right? Like so, and I'm just bringing forth that mindset and that thought that, oh, it's not going to happen here until it does. So you're right. Utilize, the education on the wildland urban interface, because I'm sure in Maui, right, there's a lot of people maybe didn't think it was going to happen, or take me through that too. What are you finding there, by the way?
So it's tough, boy. I mean, over 2,000 structures were destroyed, 102 lives were lost. So sad. Lahaina is a historical center for the islands. Beautiful area. It's on the west side, and the town where it started in the grass, which was just up the mountain from a community of single family homes, and the winds were really high. There were 80-mile-an-hour winds or so. It toppled 30 different utility poles, ended up catching some grass on fire, and that small grass fire turned into a major urban conflagration. It went from 1 home to 10 homes to 50 homes to 100 homes to 1,000 homes, ultimately over 2,000 structures that were lost. It went so fast that a lot of the folks, 80% of the people that died in this one community, that was an older community, both older structures and older residents. I mean, most of the people were over 60, many were 70s and 80s. In this one particular area, this like 5 streets, about 80% of the people died right in there. Very narrow streets. Some of them were 15, 18 feet wide. You think of a normal street of being about 30 to 40 feet wide. It was half of that. You could barely get a fire engine in there. People were running for their lives. The fire was moving so fast. Now, why? So many of these structures in that area were built in the 30s, 40s, 50s. Some of them were very small when they were built. That's why you had narrow streets. They were 500, 600, 700 square feet. And they didn't have vehicles back in the 30s. They were mostly plantation workers, so they would be provided transportation to the fields that they were working in. They didn't need vehicles. And so there wasn't, the streets weren't very wide. Over time, those structures grew. As families started moving into the structures, they added another room, they added a garage, they added a back room, and so on and so forth. And pretty soon you're like 2 feet away from the property line. And then your neighbor did the same thing. And the neighbor did the same thing. And so you have a very densely populated area. And many of these structures, they had 3 to 4 cars attached to them, because you have a multi-family, multi-generational type environment in that area. And I mean, some of these people had been there for generations. So anyway, I think you can tell by what I'm presenting here is that with the density, and with also a lot of the homes had louvered windows. I mean, they take advantage of the trade winds, right? And let the air just kind of flow through your house. And even though you're going to try to shut those on a windy day when it's all dusty, but it's still hot outside, and you may keep open a few, and there's no garage doors either. And so these were pathways of embers. There were millions, billions, I don't know, but, the ember showers were intense, and they just bombarded this built environment that had some areas of compromised structural components. Some of the roofs had been lifted off. Many of the roofs were at least damaged. Some were completely lifted off their structures. And so now you have just these showers of embers going inside and lighting these structures on fire. And these were the conditions. And you also had some vegetation that was growing around some of these structures. And this is where the research is going, was really understanding how fire advances in those circumstances. And then what are the codes and standards that need to be implemented to prevent that from happening in the future. And there are codes out there that address this type of stuff. You think about the home hardening and the vegetation management around the defensible space, they call it, around the structures. So all of these things could be done. And those are included in like the ICC WUI code is one source of information. And then also a lot of the research that came out from the hazard mitigation methodology from the campfire from NIST and Alex Marangides. Awesome stuff. There's like 40 vulnerabilities that are identified within that study. And many of those all of those were present in this fire. And so lots to talk about, obviously.
And it's sad that it always takes a tragedy, right? To really see, all these things kind of came together, obviously in the worst possible scenario, but the takeaways are we need to learn from these things. And I know, that's kind of what fuels your passion and has fueled you for these now it's 15, 20 years of you looking at data and research. Out of everything that you've done and learned over the last 15 years, can you sum it up to our listeners in 2 or 3 things that you think every firefighter needs to know? I mean, you've learned all of these lessons. You just said 40 different things that, for the wildland urban interface. We talked about some structural things. We talked about fire dynamics, but sum up if you have a listening to the audience, which ours is now grown to over 100, by the way. So we're really happy with that. It used to be 4, used to be our family members. But hopefully those 100 tell another 100 and tell another 100. But what are kind of your 3 golden rules of things that you really learned and want everybody to know over the last couple of years?
So I would say first, keep yourself healthy, fit, capable. I mean, that's important. Making sure that you're exercising, you're eating right, and you're monitoring your health. You're going to your annual medical exam. I think those are really important things, because without your body, you can't be a firefighter, and that's the bottom line, right? You're going to rely on your body. The other thing is to be aware of your surroundings, and so what I mean by that is, like, weather plays a role in fires. And I was looking at the weather on the East Coast. There was a bunch of red flag weather rolling through Philadelphia area and all that area. They had fires going off last week.
Mm-hmm.
But you can anticipate that by looking at the forecast and anticipating what kind of weather you're going to be working in when you get to work. So watch the news, look at your weather apps, understand what, it could be storms, it could be fire weather, whatever, it could be windy weather, but know how that's going to impact the fire that you're going to respond to. I think that's really important. And then the last thing is that be up to date, be contemporary with your knowledge. Be in lockstep with where the research is going. Now, I don't expect you to know exactly what Adam Bowery is doing or what Craig Weinchak is doing with NARES or what Keith Stake is doing with structure fire suppression and all that. However, you should know the highlights and understand how fires progress in enclosed structures. That's important. Know the basics. And then if you have a healthy body, if you understand what the weather's doing and how the fuels are going to respond to that, and you understand your fire suppression evidence-based techniques in whatever fire, you got a strong firefighter. I mean, it's as simple as that. I mean, I know that it sounds simple, but it takes discipline to say, I'm going to roll out of bed, I'm going to eat the right things, and I'm going to exercise. And then, you know what? I'm going to check the weather. I'm going to know what's going on. I'm going to really understand how weather impacts my job, and then understanding fire suppression. But I'm going to add one more, because I think
I love bonuses. I do. Yeah.
And I know this is like emotional health and all that is a big thing, right? And I believe in it. I believe that if you're not emotionally well, if you're not psychologically well, then all those other three things, they don't fit. You can't optimize those other things unless you're like centered with yourself. So I think, and that's a result of good relationships and making good choices with your life, and all of those things are really important. In mine, I mean, I had my wife's awesome, so she knew that this was my passion, and she was on board, and the kids knew it. I mean, when I was working on the whole fireground survival thing, and I was trying to come up with a mnemonic to remember what to do in the event that you got in a bad spot. That's where Grab Lives was originated. And it started by like having a conversation at the dinner table with my family. I mean, that's where it started. And my kids like, okay, let's see if we can piece this together, literally. And we have 5 kids. And and then even the Mayday usage in the fire service was being resisted by certain folks. And we had to, Bert Clark and I were breaking that down, and NFPA standards, and being able to recognize the use of Mayday. I mean, all of that. But all of that was from like my family, like participated in that, which was really kind of cool. So.
Yeah. Oh, great stuff. We didn't talk much about all your involvement with the health and safety side, the WFI side. And I did that on purpose so we can bring you back for another episode, because it's always great to talk to you and good to see you again. And, I'm very fortunate to call you a friend and mentor. I mean, you've been in a lot of rooms where I've taken a lot of notes. And like I said, I watched you back in, 2012 and 2013, 2014, in those videos. You have a way of talking to the firefighters that you put things, complex statements and complex things in a simplified manner to talk to the truck heads like me. And I appreciate that. And I really, I'm glad that you're continuing that with what you're doing right now. And it's good to see you. Good to see you out again. But by the way, you're not done yet. now you're in now the hard questions. Now we go into some hot seat questions, and we've had 100+ episodes. And of course we can't keep things the same. We have to continually reinvent ourselves. We have to be more aware of our surroundings, like you had just pointed out, and our listeners, and they want some different kind of questions. So Janelle and I came up with them, and she's always chomping at the bit to get them started. So a couple more things we're going to try to get out of you here, Chief.
All right, cool.
All right, Chief. First question, if you had to start your career over from day one, what would you do differently?
Ooh, what would I think I would have, I would have like stopped to just enjoy it a little more. I felt like at times I was, I don't know. I felt like I was running too fast. Like I always felt like I didn't know enough. So there was always this like pursuit of more instead of just kind of enjoying the moment. If you like some of my fellow firefighters, I would see them do that. And like, oh, they would go on trips and do these kind of things. I didn't really do that. And maybe I should have done like more recreational activities outside of the job to kind of enjoy it a little more. That I know that's a very odd way to answer that question, because I was given so many opportunities to do things that maybe other people weren't, just because but that was luck. That was just because I was standing at the right place at the right time. No joke. And there was just issues that I had a little bit of knowledge on, and then I was just there. But I wish I would have kind of step back and kind of, and even document some of the things that I experienced. That would have been nice. Like I didn't do any of that. I mean, I should have. I know some people, like, they write down their funny calls and stuff, and they keep a journal. No, it's all like right here, or whatever I told my kids. That's it. So that would have been good.
Well, and it's funny you say that, right?
Yeah,
Janelle, you
quite a segue.
like unbelievable segue, because the next question, of course, you could tell who created which questions, because mine's like, Janelle's is how, if you to start your career, is really deep. And then of course my question is, all right, give me the funniest or wildest fire station or call that you've ever been on.
Oh.
That you're allowed to share.
Yeah, well, we can beep out stuff.
Yeah, get arrested.
Let's
ratings here.
Yeah. Do you want heads, hands? Like, okay. So right around the time of the riots, was that 90? Can't remember what year that was now. I used to always remember, but right around that time, I was at a South Central station, and we had a call, and the dog, Petey the dog, wanted to come on the call, and so we let Petey the dog come on the call, and this was a pit bull, and this was in South Central Los Angeles. We had a pet pit bull that used to ride the rig, used to just hang out in the station. And you could take him home for a 4-day. Like, he would stay with your family. I mean, it's just an amazing dog.
That's awesome.
He's the nicest dog. So anyway, I'm at the station. I was an engineer at the time, but one of the guys was practicing to be an engineer. So he asked me to cover the paramedic squad for him. So I said, okay, fine. So anyway, the bell goes off for the paramedic squad, and I got to jump on, and Petey jumps on, and we hustle out. And we're making our way, and we're driving, and we've got the rock music going, and we're singing, driving code 3 through Los Angeles, all cool. And then we see like this mass of people in front of us. We're like, oh no, what's going on there? Like, oh, maybe is that the call? No, that's not the call. The call's beyond that. Oh no, well, let's get a little tighter. So we get inside. It turns out, so we get around the people, and we go, and there's a guy with a machete that's like swinging a machete around, trying to take out as many people as possible. But the people are trying to get to him to get him to wrestle his machete away. So they're like, we're like, hey, easy. So turns out we got Petey. Petey jumps out and runs after the guy. and that scares him. And he did get one guy on the arm that was bleeding out. And so we had the paramedics wrestling him down. Petey's barking at this guy. He finally lets his machete go. The cops come and arrest him. But Petey was there. He like made an arrest, man. He literally scared the guy into dropping his weapon.
Petey
saves the day. And did you like bring him back in and then go to the actual call, or did you generate an?
Yeah.
Still had it.
We had to stay there because we had the people that were bleeding out right there. That wasn't our call, so we had to get somebody else to go on the other call. Yeah, so that was just one of them that I always remember, and like that was a trip.
L.A. in 1992.
Yeah, there you go. So anyway.
Oh my goodness. Okay, Derek, if you weren't a firefighter, what would you be doing?
Oh man. So man, that is hard to say. My father was a machinist. I was actually going to school to be a doctor, but then I'm like, no, that ain't for me for sure. So I just got my degree and got out and got in the fire service. I'd probably be a teacher, actually. I mean, that's what I went into right after college, and I enjoyed that. But while I was doing that, a friend of mine I saw him. I grew up in San Pedro, and I was living in San Pedro at the time. I was teaching at the local high school, and a friend of mine drove. I saw him on the road, and he's like, "Hey, pull over. I'm going to talk to you." He ended up going to get an application for LA County Fire Department. I went with him, and that's how I got on the job. So I probably would have still be teaching at the time. Yeah.
It's kind of fitting because that's what you're doing now, except your audience is, 1.1 million firefighters that you're really trying to educate. I mean, very similar. So in a way, you went right back to what you were, after your fire career. So, right. It's a win-win for us in the fire service, along with all the different, tidbits of information that you've given us today and insights. And again, it's great to see it, Chief. Appreciate you in all your efforts. Like it's like a lot, like you said, you wish you would have maybe stepped back a little bit, probably not in your personality to do that. Cause I imagine you went from one project, and I when I met you, you had 3 different things going on. You were with WFI, you were doing these things. So, thanks to your family for allowing you to do that, because of, all the different things that you've been involved with. But it comes back to that one question about, today, and you being now, did you say you're 50, 55 now? You said 60. What are you doing now to still get better?
I pretty much do the same things. I try to wake up and touch my toes. I squat down all the way. I do my exercises and check myself and make sure everything is still functioning decently, and I can full range of motion, that sort of thing. I have a lot of problems with my hip and my knee that I need to address, but it starts there. And my wife says that I need more hobbies, because last night, I was reading up on stuff for Maui, but I really enjoy it. There's so much to know. And the fire service, there's so much we don't know about fires. Look, I always talk about it. We're burning down full towns. We don't understand it. We're still killing firefighters. We're still killing people in fires. There's so much to know and to do differently. So right now, it's still kind of what burns inside of me. But the nice thing is that we get to travel around and do this from my home. We have other places that we can go to. We have a van that we travel around in and do fun things. And I have Starlink, so I can do this from wherever. So we enjoy the outdoors, and doing things like that.
And why would you give that up? You get to burn stuff for a living.
I know,
That's right. Every firefighter's dream. Like well, if you're taking applications, you're probably going to have 100 people like applying to be like, I just want to work at UL. Can I be the boom guy? How do I do that?
Yeah. Well, I think I agree with you. I think everybody should want to work here. I mean, it's amazing to be kind of on the inside and to sit and listen to the engineers work through a problem and develop an experiment, and then to know that you can build buildings and light big fires, to really understand it. Fire doesn't scale well, so it'd be great if we can all just build dollhouses and run little hose lines, through dollhouse. That doesn't work, right? It doesn't scale. So you have to. It's all full scale stuff. Well, we have some bench scale stuff that we run, but a lot, once we get down to tactical considerations, it's full scale. Yeah. We're not going to write you tactical considerations off of bench scale stuff.
Right. But that's stuff that I use every single day. And that, you get to see firsthand, right? And you also get to see what happens when we don't follow those.
Yeah.
Right. That knowledge that we learn, from hey, let's try to put it out this way. Doesn't work. I mean, I go back to remember the videos where people, where you had vents, you did a lot of vent props where double wide and triple wide, and that thing just exploded. Right. And I guess we're right with the oxygen stuff. So,
right.
Again, so much knowledge, so many great things. One last question for you. This is off script, of course, for Janelle, but you have all these different resources, great resources at the website. And the website again is
fsri.org.
And at fsri.org, what would be the first course you would encourage people to take?
Oh gosh, now we've got a lot of short courses on there. So many that are addressing fire dynamics. So I'd start clicking on those shorter courses that we have published, and we have many more in development. Starting there, and even if you've gone through some of those, because remember the way that we used to do it is we'd finish a project and then we'd put together this hour-long course that addressed what our project was focused on. Now we're doing it a little differently. We're taking the components of segments of that project and making micro lessons more focused on a specific topic. So now you can kind of group a lot of these together in what you're interested in, and where maybe you fall short knowledge-wise, kind of build up your understanding that way. So I think those that are related to fire dynamics, I think, are really important. Those that are related to ventilation, extremely important, especially for those that think that, man, I got to get on the roof. Well, maybe you don't. Take a look and understand how fire progresses in enclosed structures a little more, and that'll maybe make you encourage you to make a different decision.
Yep. Yeah. Again, Chief, so many good things. Hopefully the first of many episodes that we'll have to. I don't know why it took 100 to get him on,
Gosh, man.
Right?
Yeah.
We got to get you on a little bit sooner. So we'll work on that a little bit, but appreciate you and all the stuff you've done and the knowledge you bestow on a lot of us. And for those that are just listening to us, I highly encourage you go on over to the firerescue1.com, Better Every Shift. There's a banner there. You can watch the videos. You can go to firerescue1.com. You can go to our YouTube channel and see all of the episodes, including this one. You can also email us at bettereveryshift@firerescue1.com. We would hope you would rate, review the show. Let me know if you think we're onto something or on something. Share it with your crew, and hopefully that spurs some great conversations. Thanks again for all the insights and for all of you listening, right? This means nothing unless you learn from it, you do something about it, and share something to make you and those around you better every shift. Thanks for listening, everybody.